April 14, 1943. A Spanish fishing boat off the coast of Huelva, southern Spain. The sea is calm, the morning light pale and indistinct. A body floats face down in the swell, dressed in a Royal Air Force greatcoat, lashed loosely to a battered Mae West life jacket. The fishermen who spot it do not know they are about to become unwitting participants in one of the most audacious deceptions of the Second World War. They haul the corpse aboard, hand it to the local authorities, and within hours word reaches the German intelligence network embedded throughout Spain. A British officer, drowned at sea, carrying a locked briefcase chained to his wrist. Inside that briefcase, documents of extraordinary sensitivity. The Germans will read them. They are meant to. Nothing about this man is what it appears to be, and everything about what happens next will help determine whether tens of thousands of Allied soldiers live or die on the beaches of Sicily a few months later. This is the story of Operation Mincemeat, and it matters because it represents something rare in the history of warfare. A plan in which the only weapon was a lie, the only soldier was a man already dead, and the only battlefield was the imagination of an enemy intelligence officer in Berlin. By the spring of 1943, the Allies faced a problem that no amount of conventional firepower could solve. North Africa was secured. The next logical step, obvious to any military strategist on either side, was an invasion of Sicily, the stepping stone to mainland Italy, and the soft underbelly of occupied Europe that Churchill had long spoken of. The trouble was precisely that it was obvious. Winston Churchill himself reportedly remarked that anyone but a damned fool would know it was Sicily. The Germans knew it too. Hitler's high command had already begun reinforcing the island, and German divisions that might otherwise have been deployed to the Eastern Front or held in reserve were instead massing across the Mediterranean, anticipating exactly the assault the Allies intended to launch. This presented a strategic nightmare. An invasion against a heavily reinforced Sicily risked catastrophic casualties, the kind of losses that could cripple the entire Mediterranean campaign before it began. The Allies needed the Germans to believe the attack would fall somewhere else entirely, ideally somewhere far less defensible for the Allies, but far more plausible to a skeptical German analyst. Sardinia and Greece became the chosen decoys. But simply broadcasting false radio chatter or staging dummy troop movements had been tried before, with limited success. German intelligence, battered by repeated Allied deceptions, had grown wary of obvious misdirection. What was needed was something so intimate, so seemingly accidental, that it would bypass skepticism entirely. Not a lie told to the enemy, but a lie the enemy would believe they had discovered for themselves. The challenge, then, was almost philosophical in nature. How does one deceive an intelligence service that exists specifically to detect deception? The answer, devised in a windowless basement office in the Admiralty in London, would require a body, a backstory, and a level of bureaucratic forgery so meticulous it bordered on the absurd. The plan was conceived within a small unit known as the 20 Committee, working alongside the XX Committee and the wider deception apparatus that had grown increasingly sophisticated as the war progressed. Two men in particular drove the scheme forward: Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley of M35 and Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague of Naval Intelligence. Cholmondeley had floated an earlier, similarly macabre idea involving a corpse dropped by parachute, and though that plan was shelved, its bones, so to speak, survived to form the basis of what became mincemeat. Montague, a barrister by training with a meticulous legal mind, became the scheme's principal architect, obsessing over every conceivable detail that might betray the deception to a sharp-eyed German pathologist. The technical innovation here was not mechanical, but psychological, and arguably more delicate than any piece of engineering produced during the war. The team needed a body that could plausibly have died from drowning after an aircraft crash at sea, since drowning produces specific, recognizable changes in the lungs and tissue that a competent pathologist would expect to see, and, crucially, that would mask the actual cause of death. They found their man in Glyndŵr Michael, a Welsh laborer who had died after ingesting rat poison, likely while sleeping in a derelict building in London. His death by phosphorus poisoning produced fluid in the lungs consistent enough with drowning to withstand cursory examination, though the body would need to be kept refrigerated and handled with extreme care, since any prolonged delay risked decomposition that would unravel the entire deception. The body was given a name, an identity, a rank, and an entire fabricated life. He became Major William Martin of the Royal Marines, attached to Combined Operations Headquarters. Montague's team built him a personality from nothing, a fiancée named Pam, whose photograph and love letters were tucked into his pockets, written by a real woman working in MI5's offices. A stern letter from his father regarding finances, theater ticket stubs, a receipt for an engagement ring, even an overdraft notice from his bank, the kind of mundane, irritating detail that lends a forged life its texture of authenticity. Nothing about Major Martin could feel staged. Every object had to feel like the accumulated debris of an ordinary man's pockets, not the careful construction of a deception unit. The body was sealed inside a custom-built canister, roughly 2 meters in length, packed with dry ice to keep it cold during transport, not unlike the insulated containers used to ship perishable goods, though considerably heavier and far more carefully guarded. The canister itself weighed close to 200 kilograms when loaded. It was transported by lorry from London to Greenock in Scotland, then loaded aboard the submarine HMS Seraph, commanded by Lieutenant Norman Jewell, for the journey south to the Spanish coast. The submarine's crew were told only that they carried meteorological equipment, a cover story so mundane that few questioned it. The most critical element, however, was the briefcase. Chained to Major Martin's wrist, it contained a personal letter, ostensibly from Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Sir Harold Alexander, commanding British forces in Tunisia. The letter discussed forthcoming operations in a tone of casual insider familiarity, referencing an invasion of Greece and the Balkans whilst mentioning Sicily only as the subject of a deliberate deception operation designed to mislead the Germans into thinking that island was the true target. It was a lie wrapped inside the explanation of a lie, a document so layered in deceit that even if the Germans suspected trickery, the deeper truth they would uncover was itself false. The letter's tone, its handwriting, its very paper stock, were all scrutinized and refined for weeks before approval. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. On the morning of April 30th, 1943, HMS Seraph surfaced off Huelva and released the body into the water, positioning it so the tides would carry it ashore. Within hours, Spanish fishermen discovered the corpse just as planned. Spain, though officially neutral, was riddled with German intelligence contacts, and local authorities were known to cooperate quietly with Abwehr agents operating under diplomatic cover. The documents were handed to the Spanish naval authorities who, following protocol that British intelligence had anticipated almost perfectly, allowed German agents access to examine and photograph the contents before formally returning them to the British vice consul in Huelva. The Germans devoured the documents with evident enthusiasm. Major Adolf Klaus, a German intelligence officer based in Huelva, recognized the potential significance immediately and ensured the material reached Berlin through the appropriate channels. Photographs of the letters were forwarded to the German intelligence apparatus, where they were assessed by figures with direct access to Hitler himself. The deception's success rested entirely on a chain of individuals, each making the choice the British had gambled they would make: curiosity over caution, opportunity over procedure. What followed, according to surviving German records examined after the war, suggests the deception worked with startling thoroughness. Reinforcements that might have flowed to Sicily were instead diverted towards Sardinia and Greece. General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel was even reportedly considered for a command in Greece in anticipation of the supposed invasion there. German naval mining operations intensified around Sardinia and the Greek coastline rather than concentrating on Sicilian defenses. Exact figures for troop redistribution remained difficult to verify with total precision, since wartime records were incomplete and post-war accounts occasionally exaggerate the scheme's impact for dramatic effect. But the documented diversion of forces away from Sicily in the weeks preceding the actual invasion stands as the clearest evidence of the operation's success. When Allied forces landed on Sicily on July 10, 1943, resistance proved considerably lighter than military planners had feared. Casualties, whilst real and significant, fell well short of the catastrophic projections that had haunted planning sessions earlier in the year. It would be inaccurate and disrespectful to claim mincemeat alone determined this outcome. Aerial bombardment, naval support, and the broader weakening of Axis forces in the Mediterranean all played substantial roles. But intelligence officers on both sides, then and since, have credited the deception with measurably easing the invasion's path, buying time and reducing the concentration of German armor that might otherwise have met the landing forces directly. The comparison with German deception efforts of the period reveals an instructive contrast. German intelligence services certainly attempted their own misdirection campaigns, but rarely achieved comparable sophistication in psychological construction. The Abwehr's efforts tended towards more conventional methods: double agents, falsified radio traffic, diplomatic misdirection. Nothing in the German playbook matched the sheer narrative completeness of mincemeat, the way an entire fictional human being, with debts and a fiancé and an overdraft, was constructed to carry a lie past the most rigorous scrutiny. American deception efforts during the same period, whilst growing more sophisticated as the war progressed, particularly with the elaborate fictional army group later assembled under Operation Fortitude ahead of D-Day, drew direct inspiration from the British model established by mincemeat. The conceptual lineage between the corps on the Spanish beach in 1943 and the phantom armies assembled in southern England in 1944 runs remarkably direct, with several of the same intelligence officers involved in both schemes. The legacy of Operation Mincemeat extends well beyond Sicily itself. It became something of a template for an entire philosophy of deception warfare, one premised on the idea that human psychology, properly understood and exploited, could prove more decisive than any conventional weapon. The operation demonstrated that intelligence officers willing to think beyond traditional military deception, willing to construct an entire human life from forged ephemera, could achieve effects that artillery and aircraft could not. Ewan Montague later wrote an account of the operation, published years after the war, once the relevant material had been declassified, offering one of the earliest public glimpses into the strange, meticulous craft of wartime deception. Glyndwr Michael, the man whose body made the entire scheme possible, was buried in Huelva under the name William Martin, his true identity kept secret for decades. It was not until 1997 that his actual name was formally added to the gravestone, a quiet acknowledgement, long delayed, that an impoverished laborer with no family to claim him had played a part in a deception that helped shape the outcome of a Mediterranean campaign. His grave can still be visited today in the Cementerio de Nuestra Señora de la Soledad in Huelva, a modest marker for a man who never volunteered for anything, who never wore a uniform in life, and who nonetheless became, in death, Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. The briefcase, the love letters, the overdraft notice, even Pam's photograph. These objects scattered across museum archives and private collections now stand as physical remnants of a deception that relied on nothing more sophisticated than paper, ink, and an unflinching attention to human detail. The Imperial War Museum in London holds material connected to the operation, offering visitors a chance to see the tangible debris of a lie that helped redirect the course of a military campaign. Return for a moment to that Spanish beach on the morning of April 30th, 1943. A body in the water, drifting toward shore on a tide that British planners had calculated with as much precision as the currents would allow. No explosion, no gunfire, no dramatic confrontation between opposing forces. Just a corpse, a briefcase, and a story so carefully constructed that an enemy nation built its military strategy around a fiction. What Operation Mincemeat achieved was not victory through force, but victory through narrative, the understanding that an enemy's greatest vulnerability is not always its defenses but its assumptions, its eagerness to believe what fits its existing fears. The Germans wanted to believe the invasion would come at Sardinia or Greece because that fitted patterns they already suspected. British intelligence simply gave them the evidence to confirm what they were already inclined to think, and in doing so, controlled the outcome more thoroughly than any weapon could have managed alone. Major William Martin never existed. Glinder Michael never asked to become him. And yet, the fiction these two facts combined to create may have spared thousands of Allied soldiers from the beaches of a heavily defended Sicily. No medals were given for the corpse that crossed the Atlantic by submarine and washed ashore exactly where it was meant to. No memorial bears the names of those who might have died had the deception failed. There is only a quiet gravestone in Huelva, a handful of forged letters preserved behind museum glass, and the unsettling, enduring lesson that sometimes the most powerful weapon available to any nation at war is not steel, not explosive, not even intelligence in the conventional sense, but the disciplined, patient construction of a lie convincing enough to be mistaken for the truth.